Okay. Welcome and thank you very much for coming, to everyone on the panel that my colleague will introduce in a little bit. I will just set the stage for this discussion very quickly. Basically, we see this as an event to take stock over all the efforts that have gone in to accelerating forest transitions over the last 2 decades. This has involved many efforts at the international level and also many efforts at the national level. And we think that this is an urgent, it's urgent to take stock of these efforts and to come out with a diagnose over what has worked well, what are the challenges that remain for advancing and accelerating the pace towards many of the targets that have been set for halting deforestation and forest degradation internationally. So, I mean, just for the framing, the target of halting deforestation and forest degradation by 2030 has been iterated in many international declarations, and we are still at this point. We have made much progress, but we are not on track to reach that target. So we are here to take stock of that. And to look into specifically, given what has worked well over the last 2 decades in the efforts by international initiatives and national administrations, and which challenges remain. The central question is, are we governing forest transitions in a way that truly supports deep forest transitions in countries? So with that, I pass the word to my friend and colleague José Carlos from BC3 here at COP, also working with the FAO, to moderate this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johannes. And is this better? To speak of governing forest transitions, we think it's an important discussion because we're only 5 years away from the target to halt deforestation by 2030. But as fuel for that, we've had already 15 years of experience advancing ideas and actions in countries that have been developing strategies and policies to address deforestation. And also we have seen how in parallel there has been a significant growth in instruments, in ways to support, some of them on technical cooperation, some of them on investment, some of them related to markets, some of them sector-based. And in this explosion of activities and instruments, the question is, are we being effective? Resources are getting ever more limited, and with the time being short, we need to have precision actions, precision shots for the next 5 years. So for the panel, we want to unpack that exploration to understand a bit better what are the challenges to do that acceleration, and how the international instruments dialogue with the national ones back and forth, and how can that relationship be enhanced. In the panel, I'll introduce you in a second, but to do this exploration, we are privileged to have not only people that have individual perspectives, or country perspectives, or institutional perspectives. No, what we have is 4 life histories from multiple angles in supporting this process. We have Sergio Graf from Mexico, will explore the case of Mexico in more depth. He is now the National Forest Commissioner for Mexico, but he used to be the Minister of Environment for the state of Jalisco, and he was even a director of one of the natural reserves in the country, in Manantla. We have arriving fresh from Ghana. Thank you very much, Rosalind, for running through registration. Rosalind, Joshua Ajay, he's probably the most knowledgeable person with a history on the path that Ghana has taken and the multiple steps to incorporate REDD, to implement REDD, to follow the results, and then to think in ways to connect the multiple instruments. And we're very grateful to have her perspective. And we also have Catherine Godard, that is currently a senior policy advisor for the Minister of Ecological Transition in France. But before that, she has been involved in other capacities, including as part of the FAO team, providing support during the readiness phase to countries, and also working for the European Commission and the European Forest Institute, which gives her a broad perspective from developing and multilateral institutions. And Maria Sanz, the Science Director for BC3. And again, if someone knows about the multilateral processes and the challenges to bring countries together around advancing the Apollo agenda more generally, and specifically the forest agenda, is Maria. And so, with those four fantastic panelists and ingredients, this is the game plan. I will invite first Sergio and Rosalind to speak a little bit about what was a forest transition for them. What did it involve? When REDD came to their desk and they were challenged with all deforestation in your country, what is the recipe? To navigate us from those ingredients and the process that emerged. After that, I will broaden the panel and bring in Catherine to ask the question as to how has the dialogue between the local and international mechanisms to govern and to provide support fared? What has worked? What has not worked? And to start thinking then, up to now, what are some of the lessons learned that we may want to take in positioning the action forward? And as a third and final round, I will then basically ask, out of the experience, out of the needs on transition, what are some things that we still need to fine-tune? What are some of the recommendations or key actions that we should take to improve the overall process? So, without further ado, I will then pass the floor to Sergio to give us a brief overview, a 3-minute overview of Mexico's journey on the forest transition.
Thank you, Jose Carlos. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today and take part of this panel. I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me and all of you for joining this important conversation. Well, first I want to give you a context of Mexico. Is predominantly forest country. 7 out of every 10 hectares of our territory are covered by forest vegetation, tropical forests, tropical mountain forests, scrublands, and mangroves, totaling 138 million hectares, which hosts a great diversity of ecosystems. As REDD was launched in Mexico, the country embarked in an ambitious plan to address the driver of deforestation and forest degradations, principally since the COP of Cancun, that Mexico take a very high commitment through avoid deforestation in the country. Back then, we knew that the structural causes of forest loss were related to weak environmental governance and limited economic opportunities for ejidos and communities in Mexico, who collective own more than 70% of tropical and mountain forest lands. The goal of our strategy was to achieve sustainable rural development through three key policies: enhancing technical and governance capacity for territorial management, with two principal aspects, is the strengthening community forest management. Was very important because the landowners are principally ejidos and communities, that the forests are their principal income. And the other one is expanding the network of a new model that we develop in Mexico, starting in one state of Jalisco, is expanding the network of intermunicipal association as territorial governance entities to permit us to have a nested approach from the local territories with municipalities, but associated to the federal government to have a collaboration through the states. The second point is the scaling up of our payment of environmental service scheme, national, local, and principally for water and biodiversity. Third is enhancing coordination and alignment of cross-sectoral policies with Ministry of Agriculture. That was very important because the agriculture is the principal driver of deforestation in the country, and agriculture and livestock, and that was very important to have this association. And enhance our forest monitoring capacity, which in a country with high diversity and complex terrain was particularly challenging. Really, and international support was very important to develop this capacity. In fact, funding for forests in Mexico with national budget grew from $800 million in 2003 to $400 million US in 2015. That was a very high growth of investment for the country. At the time, close to $450 million were also mobilized in loans, principally, and some grants, around 20% of the forest budget for 5 years, with multiple sources: French, Spanish, Unity Euro, FIP, World Bank, IDB. And the results were significant in this period. The coordination of agriculture and forestry policies start, or payment of environmental service program from covering 120,000 hectares in 2003 reached to 1 million hectares in 2016. Institutional capacity at national and subnational levels were built, and the first intermunicipal association were created and have contributed to the territorial impact in the state with early reduction, such as Jalisco, Yucatan, and now Michoacan. Now we have 11 intermunicipal associations in Jalisco, 3 in Chiapas, 1 in Quintana Roo, and 1 in Yucatan. Oncoming forestry will manage to support the development of capacity in ejidos and community to access the voluntary carbon market through the CAR standard, which currently has in Mexico 199 forestry and land use projects registered and under development, 2 of them being blue carbon projects. The capacity developed during this period were also reflected in the reduction of deforestation that began to emerge in 2016. However, and after this first place of support that was very positive by 2020, several things changed. The prominence of commodity as driver of deforestation became clear, principally the commercial is to export. The expectation of significant payment for bread did not materialize. That's really difficult to arrive to have a payment of results. And now with because in a period with GCF program failing to be renewed until last year, economic condition in the country forced a significant reduction in public budget, forcing us to rethink the approach. and the vulnerability of forests to disease, fires, droughts, and other became more important. And finally, we have a problem to achieve the FCP fund from Mexico for different conditions. Another part, the last one, is no payment for results had been received yet. Zero. Since 15 years working, we can't achieve to have employment results payment for the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergio. And already some things start to emerge. The nested governance challenges, sort of the multi-scale, but also the cross-sectoral governance challenges, to get the fuel, the investments to materialize capacity building and transformations. But it was not only the challenges of mobilizing international finance. You also mentioned the domestic conditions that led to a domestic reduction in the budgets. And for me, in this conversation, one of the relevant elements is how can we build resilience in the policies that in the packages that we advance. Resilience to changing conditions that can maintain the core transformation in place. So, thank you very much, Sergio. I'll now pass to Rosalind to tell us a different but also quite similar story in many ways.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jose Carlos. Thank you to Johannes for inviting me. Very good morning to everyone here. It's indeed a pleasure to be in Belém. I've been looking forward to this for some time. For everybody who is a nature lover, I'm sure this COP means a lot to us. So to the question that you posed, Jose Carlos, really... Okay, you can hear me? Okay, about the drivers, the policy mix, and the actions that we have taken in our forest landscape for the past 20 years. Ghana has been through 3 different policy iterations. The initial 2 were really focused on harvesting for timber. But then we realized that we had to move from the non-consumptive uses of the forest to get into the non-consumptive, to get into the non-consumptive use of forest, and identify how we could have payments for ecosystem services without cutting down the timber. And the main drivers that we were addressing in the first 2 policy iterations were illegal logging. But then in the third, we realized that agricultural expansion had also come up as a very strong driver. And currently, if we're going to do any forest policy iteration, we're going to be considering illegal mining, which has also become quite a strong driver. So that, with those drivers in mind, Ghana, I believe, for most of you who know, we have been in this forest law enforcement, governance and trade conversation for a long time. We've just been able to issue our very first FLEC license, making us the 2nd country after Indonesia. That was one of our first policy directions, that let's get into this conversation on the FLEC-T process through the voluntary partnership agreement. Then came on REDD+, which then began to address the issues of expansionist agricultural activities. And as you know, cocoa is very important for Ghana, and you realize that a lot of people were doing cocoa farming within the forest lands, not really cutting down the trees like you detect at a go, but just one tree at a time. The canopy opens up small, little by little, and then they get in and do cocoa production. So that was the whole essence of our REDD+ strategy, that let's begin by addressing expansionist agricultural activities through first our cocoa landscapes, and then scale it up gradually to cover the entire country. Now, we use our REDD+ strategy to do a lot more things. One, and I believe that the experience from Mexico also highlighted this, how are we going to get communities more involved? Because if you really want to achieve sustainable forest protection, conservation, rehabilitation, you need to have inclusive governance structures. Ultimately, local communities are more in touch with the forest than any government entity that tries to come in to regulate. And so if you have local communities understanding why we must have sustainable practices, half of your problem is actually solved. And then you have to get into the resourcing aspect. And that's why our Red Plus journey then entered into trading for emission reductions, not just doing the readiness, but how can we use Red Plus as a strategy to also drive in climate finance that helps us address the different resource gaps that we have. And then we decided to move it a notch higher by not just sticking and staying with the FCPF, but expanding the finance basket into the voluntary carbon market space, because that also gives us a lot of room to engage with private sector actors who are already in Ghana through diverse means because of the different commodities that we have, particularly cocoa, timber, and gold that they are really interested in. How can we engineer their thinking into sustainable practices to rehabilitate our degraded forest landscapes? And the final bit is on provision of alternative livelihood support for local communities. Now, we realize that it's not just enough to say that the community should stay off the forest. It's not just enough to say communities should protect and conserve the forest. The big question is, why was deforestation happening? Why was forest degradation happening? It's an issue of livelihoods. So if you are going to have your full-scale sustainable practices, now building capacity is one, understanding is one, monitoring is one, but ultimately when people wake up every day, they must have a livelihood source. That's where the alternative livelihoods came in. Sometimes we say additional, sometimes we say alternative. It's really to diversify the income portfolio of local communities, importantly farmers, so they don't just depend on agriculture for their livelihoods, because agriculture is seasonal. Now, the times when they don't have any harvesting to do, the tendency is to just get into the forest, do logging or do illegal mining. But if they have other alternative sources that probably are not even farm-based, then they can diversify their income sources. So this gives us a snapshot of the different policy iterations of the country and how we have come up with initiatives, FLEGT, Red Plus, to respond to these policy iterations and then actually drive tangible results on the ground. I heard my colleague from Mexico say they are yet to receive any payments. Now, Ghana has received 2 rounds of results-based payments from the FCPF. We are currently working. The country hopes to get trees issuance soon. That is also going to trigger payments from the LEAF Coalition and other efforts that we have with private partners. And then that all engineers or re-engineers the process of sustainable practices to keep our forest landscapes healthy, address deforestation and forest degradation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rosalind. And first also highlighting the fact that bringing in FLEGT, bringing in the fact that REDD doesn't come in isolation, but the blending of multiple platforms to the extent that they make sense in the same idea. The second one element that I think comes in is you mentioned not just the domestic efforts or international finance, but you mentioned that part of the carbon market strategy was also, or investment strategy was based on the local companies, on the local private sector, or private sector already engaged with the country, not the abstraction of distant buyers. Thank you so much, Rosalind. Let's move quickly to the next round, and this is probably you mentioned already hinted at some of the things that have worked and the things that have not worked, but let's quickly go to, let's say, to challenge a bit more, to identify the 3 key things that we have done well, that collectively. What have been the 3 things that we have done well, and what are the 3 things that we should do better on up to now? What looking back, and not we'll move into the future in a second. But what's been a useful contribution in Mexico, Sergio?
Well, in this process, we strengthen the capacities of the country and the subnational levels that permit us to create initiatives that that have arrived in some condition of changing of administration in between government, federal government, state government, have a continuous capacity doing an alliance with NGOs and other initiatives like GCF Task Force to support capacity of the states. And for example, these states develop local mechanism to avoid deforestation in, for example, for agave, for tequila, or avocado in Jalisco and avocado in Michoacán. It's not possible to do that if we don't have this continually strong capacity of the subnational level. In other hand, I think Mexico has maintained an transversal or mainstreaming approach with the Ministry of Agriculture and focalizing their incentives to the farmers and forest owners that permit us in these years be in condition with a very good developed mechanism of monitoring, report and verification, be in condition to present to the GCF, to the Green Climate Fund, a proposal for payment of results in the short term. And we are working with the World Bank in the ESFL and Biocarbon Fund with capacity to present a payment of results for 4 jurisdictions in the northern Mexico. And I think it's not possible if we don't have this continually growing capacity of the country. But the worst thing is the problem to maintain the expectation of local governments, state governments, communities, if the project don't result in the payment of the effort that is done, because the process is too long. And when the process is too long, we, from Cancun just now, we changed 3 presidents, 3 governors on all the state, and 15 local mayors. And politically, it's very difficult to maintain the policy, the political commitment to this agenda.
And just to add that, something that you mentioned to me before the panel, which is that even in the carbon markets, some of the challenges are now for the communities that have certified projects and they don't find a market. So they've reached the capacity, they've advanced, they certified, and the market there is
Yes. For voluntary carbon market, the strength capacities of community that permit them to achieve the market, voluntary market. But red is not the same situation.
Thank you, Sergio. Rosalind?
Thank you very much, Jose Carlos. So I want to talk about 3 things. First is leadership. And I believe that it's very important, particularly for forest governments, that we are able to show leadership. I believe that what Ghana has been able to do in the space has been to show leadership and to drive that leadership. Because this is a very big space and you need your voice to be recognized for the different nuances in our landscapes. Forest landscapes, I always say, are not the same when you come into the space of developing programs. You can have large energy programs, solar panels, cook stoves, but when you come into defining forest landscape programs, you're working really with people, their culture, their identity, and so it is quite a sensitive space, and driving every success there must really be heralded, and the story must be told from the perspective of forest landscape. So I believe that Ghana has really demonstrated a lot of leadership alongside other countries And this is one of the good things that we have done. Just for the records, and congratulations, Jose Carlos, for Uganda. And he has been the first African country to get the GCF payments. Uganda was in Ghana. Cote d'Ivoire has been to Ghana about 2 or 3 times. We've had about 10 countries come to learn on Red Plus from Ghana. And when we hear these stories on how they have also evolved in their own unique spaces, we are happy about it because we provided a platform for that kind of engagement and learning. Secondly is the fact that we've done a lot on inclusive governance, right from national level institutional arrangements to the ground level, how indigenous people and local communities can work together with private sector, with civil society, with government, with international bodies around the same table. We are all partners in this, and so we decide together, we decide what is going to work for us in the short, in the medium, in the long term, and it's really a bottom-up approach. And I'm very happy to say that on this note, some of our local community leaders have been to COP because of the kind of governance arrangements that we have had. Prior to, they had never been to any of these social spaces, and now they are freely able to engage. The third point I want to mention is really on the ability to drive finance. The fact that we have been able to demonstrate that the whole Red Plus conversation is not just up in the air, it's tangible. Receiving these results-based payments, being able to come up with benefit sharing that drives the funding directly to local communities, is also one of the good things that Ghana and other countries have done up until this stage. And so the whole Red Plus conversation is taking so long, but now we know it's doable. There's a proof of concept, it's working, and we can easily replicate. And that leads me to the challenges, the fact that we need scale. Now, every time there's a success story, it's as if it then opens up the conversation for the goalpost to be changed further. And so you realize that different requirements come in, there are more bureaucratic processes introduced, there's a talk of high integrity and how that high integrity is defined, from whose lens. I believe that as a collective society, and being in Berlin where we talk about the global mutual, we have to do more to support each other and agree that we can have success, but it must be progressive, and we must appreciate that progression. I don't think we are going to have a perfect system in one day, but the fact that we have a stepwise approach to attracting or achieving that perfection is very important. And so ability to have scale and have all these success stories at different levels in different countries is the next step that I believe we should work towards, and to deliver finance with speed, because really we are working with a climate emergency, and that should really be what drives us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosalie. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of the car where you want to pay the attention on the changes in the speed, not necessarily on an exact line of that, and this progression. No, thank you so much, Rosalie. Catherine, what's your take on this book? Again, from the multiple perspectives that you have, because you've seen it not only from the national stories, but from what has worked and what hasn't worked, what could be improved in the broader collective. I mean, you've seen the fabulous.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for being here, because really you are in two very important countries, so I'm a bit intimidated basically, because you are really leading the way in forestry. So really we are learning from you both. So thank you very much for sharing this experience with us. So I will just share a bit my experiences from different point of view, because I worked in the past for FAO, the UN WET program, and I worked at for European Forest Institute, so more on FACTI issues, and now I'm working for the Ministry of Environment of France, but I work also with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in France, so I have different perspective in that. Oh, sorry. So yeah, first I would like maybe to recall about what Johannes said at the beginning, that there is also a fragmented landscape of international support, and it can also lead to extra burden in the country, and I think we really share this feeling, and we try to find ways to improve that. So I think it definitely limits the impact of international support, and yeah, I would like to find common solution to overcome that. And maybe just one experience from my side. When I started, 15 years ago, and it was the beginning of Red Plus, I arrived in a country and I said, okay, I will just maybe do capacity building on Red Plus. And I say, but we are already doing everything of that, you know. And I think it's common sense. Then I just said, okay, so let's just use the money the best, you know, and because you're already doing that, so we just shape it differently, basically. So I think it's really common sense to not put extra burden in the country, basically. So no, I think you asked for different key points. I think what we managed to do these last decades is really to raise the visibility of forests at very high level in all different countries, not only in forest country, but also in the northern country. Now we have the Forest and Climate Leader Partnerships also raising the bar very high. And I think that's important to keep this momentum so that we really raise this visibility. There is also an increase of capacity, and for sure, this has helped a lot in different ways. And there is a raise, I think, in coordination between donors. At the beginning, you know, we were really focused, centered by himself, you know, looking only at our main capacity, you know. And then I think we try to understand and to speak a bit more between donors and between organizations, international organizations, so that at least it's not, again, an extra burden to the country. You know, it can help, because otherwise we arrive in different direction doing the same things, and it doesn't help at all. So there have been a lot of efforts in coordination, this support, and I hope this helps. No, we face exactly the same problem as you. We have a reducing of public money, so, and we know that we raised expectation also, and we know that we need to scale up the finance, and that is very important. But there is also a decrease of public money, and so we look at different ways. We look, for example, at blended finance, because we believe that we have to use this money in the most efficient way, you know, to try to leverage the private sector so that we can arrive. So we try to provide some guarantees with public money. That's something we look at it. We look, of course, at the carbon market, and we really believe in high integrity carbon market. So, and we really believe we should build that together. So we need to build the trust on that together, so that we attract the private money. So we really are on the same page, basically, because we want this money to arrive to forest country. But we look at other things like not only compensation, but I think contribution are really important. Like you know, just not compensate your carbon emission, but also to make just the contribution and to value the environmental services. And we really believe in payment for environmental service. That's why also we funded the TFFF, which are really incredibly new, innovative, and very innovative in this sense of payment for environmental services. So we look at that inside, but also other things like contribution index. In certain companies, we want to integrate the value of forests inside the whole value chain of the private sectors, you know, so that they pay for that in a sense, or at least they value it, and we think it's really the way to look. That's why we look also at biodiversity credits or biodiversity certification. They are at the very beginning, but we believe there is a different way of seeing that. You know, there is the use for compensation, contribution, and insetting value. We really look at the two others because we think that there is much value in that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And so I think that certainly the general theme of the leadership and the political visibility that this process has triggered is fantastic. And fortunately, it's still alive and kicking. And great efforts have been made by countries to, in the case of Ghana, for instance, to weave and to use the new elements coming in. And at the same time, you see, well, but it's getting a bit too complex. I mean, I'm juggling, but you're throwing too many balls, and they're getting heavier. I need to maintain credibility and the trust inside the country. And I need to see how to blend the other ingredients. Make use of things outside the box, outside the red space. With that in mind, and knowing that many of the things that you mentioned, many of the instruments are already developed. I mean, we are not in a clean slate space. We are not in a space where we can start over. What we can is to make the right connections. And some tweaking, maybe. What are the key things that we should do moving forward? What are the key things that you would recommend someone if you were handing over the position and say, well, these are the things that should happen to make governance of forest transitions that truly connect the local and the global in better ways, and that helps your countries achieve zero deforestation by 2030. What are the key things? And maybe to kick off the discussion, I want to bring in Maria to just, from what you've heard, Maria, what stands out as some of the more neuralgic missing pieces?
I think it was, I mean, the pathway we went through, it was a necessary pathway. And some people may think it's too long, but I think it's not long enough, probably, but we have to capitalize what we have been learning. On my view, what we have been building is the enabling conditions. And so far, what everyone understands is that the enabling conditions are fundamentally two. One, the capacity building that is being built. And I think many people think about the countries alone. And I think, well, not necessarily only on the countries. I think we also had capacity building on the environment around the countries that aims to support, meaning, you know, agencies, donors. I mean, it's been a long way where all realize what are actually where we can sort of standardize things and where we don't standardize, because it has to be built in a way that tailors the needs of a specific environment, which could be a jurisdiction or could be a country as a whole. So, I mean, on my view, we have been at the beginning creating expectations that were too high, or not too high, but perhaps misunderstood. And now we have been managing those expectations, and fortunately we have been managing those expectations in a way that we have been putting the enabling conditions and the maturity also from the countries and from the international arena to match the needs and the support. And I say support because the support is not only finance. The support is spaces for exchanging, learning from each other, understanding that everyone is different. We cannot standardize things, right? The problem we had at the beginning was thinking that because markets were going to play a fundamental, almost unique role, things needed to be standardized to create credibility. But I think the point we are now, the credibility doesn't come from this approach. It comes actually from the countries building spaces of integration of policies, mainstreaming of policies, and actually confronting a much more diverse avenues of finance that can be plugged into their needs at the time where they are needed. And I think the examples that Rosalind was putting, you can use voluntary markets for some things, but you also can use the window of the GCF, which by the way took for a while to get a permanent window there, because actually the expectations were very high. And it were too much focus on markets. But now I think we understand that we need a blend finance, which I think is still maybe the question that is maturing, I think very fast, is actually how you blend at the national level the private finance, which is not necessarily only devoted to pay for ecosystem services or for carbon as such. So, but engaging private sector in a much more wide way, because at the very end, everything happens in the territory. And as Sergio was saying, I mean, at the very end, you have to manage territory with all sectors that are in there. And we have been thinking in forest alone for so long, but now we are moving transitions which are much more deep than actually one single sector. And to me, the advantage of REDD+ was that those conversations on forests are being lying the ground for much easier conversations on other sectors that are even becoming or were drivers, but not only drivers. Now there are other drivers that are popping up as well, like what you say, Rosalind, that the mining is obvious, for obvious reason is also there, or that we have renewable energy that needs to be placed also in the territory and so on. So for me, REDD has been a wonderful experiment that took the necessary time. I'm sorry to say that, and some people may think it's too long, the necessary time to consolidate those visions. And I'm very pleased to see that there are new avenues of finance popping with new sets that will have to live together with the old ones in order to ensure that countries that were not as advanced as others are learning from the ones that are advancing. Like he came to my country and say, well, we are looking for a pledge into the carbon fund and the readiness fund. We need 10% for the readiness fund and 90% for the carbon fund. And our answer from Spain was, I think it's better you swap at this point in time, right? And that actually is what happened. But now is the time of swapping to the financial avenues for implementation, but with a diversified portfolio, because otherwise, it won't work.
Thank you, Maria. And I like the idea that eventually the tools are growing and that this diversity is what's needed to tailor it to the local level. The piece in between is the countries. So I want to pass on this reflection on the key things that would facilitate the transitions of what you think Mexico should do, could do, and also the asks for the world.
Well, we have a very high challenge in Mexico to go to the next step to reduce deforestation, because the principal driver of deforestation is livestock. And livestock is different in Mexico like South America, because livestock is doing by hundreds of thousands little farmers that produce calves to the market for the internal market of beef, not for exportation. The commodities will be controlled with consumption, the import of these products with rules, non-deforestation, and mechanism that is done by each country to don't export these products. But cattle ranching is, we need to transform all the system. And for us, it's very important to achieve the GCF payment results now and ESFL payment result in this short period, to invest in this process and to grow the commitment of the visibility of the importance to maintain forage and conserve forest for forage in the future, because it's linked to the alimentation of Mexican people. And this is a really high challenge to transform, because you need a lot of money to change the production system. It's not loans. We need to attract financial or mobilize financial support for loans, low-cost loans for the change of producers, and integrate investment of government and generate capacity of the producers, and we will achieve three big results. We reduce deforestation, we increase carbon stocks because we will reduce degradation of forest for forage, and we will increase the livelihoods of people maintaining the alimentation of the country. And I think we have this focus in red is very important for Mexico, and we need have this politically well support if we achieve this payment of results of the past.
Thank you, Sergio. So, not only the money, but the funds to mobilize political capital and connecting to the bigger issues. Rosalind, what?
Thank you very much. So I believe that we still need continuous capacity to be built. Even though we have come all this way with all these many years, the whole conversation on forest and REDD+ evolves per time. When REDD+ started, we thought that there was a strict readiness phase, but even in the results-based payment phase, you realize that there is still a readiness phase in the results-based payment phase, because that's where you are really defining governance on the ground. You are channeling payments to the ground. In some countries, these systems for funds to flow don't even exist. They have to be created afresh. You need to build that capacity and also strengthen the institutions that are in the local space so that they are able to take on these functions. Because really that's where we want to get to. And if we want to eliminate any third-party interference with the transfer of these funds, we must begin to build our local community and indigenous platforms to have office systems, operating systems, financial management systems. For example, a number of countries are channeling directly finance to IPLCs. Question is, how are you going to do your accounting processes with them? How are you going to do financial management with them? For some of them, they have never done this before. And that's a whole new readiness phase. So that whole cycle of technical assistance and capacity building must continue and continue in different phases. And the next step will be to engineer an ecosystem where we are paying the right price for any emission reductions or carbon, as we normally say. I believe that if we really want to get to the space where we have sustainable mechanisms to address deforestation and forest degradation, we must pay over and beyond what the drivers of deforestation are paying. Illegal mining is paying, illegal logging is paying. Now, in Ghana, we have communities where illegal miners are paying, for example, like $50 per day for people to come do illegal mining. That's just for one person. And so if you're going to pay for carbon at $5 or $10 per ton, and that's going to be shared for so many people, question is, why should they take that over payment for deforestation to go on? Because mind you, most people think about just today. They are not thinking about tomorrow. And it's everywhere. Because really, I must survive today before I begin to think about tomorrow. And many people are really risk averse. If you say I should keep this forest until tomorrow, what is the chance that tomorrow I'm going to be alive to really even benefit from that? So I believe that we need to get into the space where we are paying right now for the right prices for emission reductions as they have to be. And this shouldn't be a one price. Every country should be able to do some cost-benefit analysis. What does it take to preserve a hectare of forest to produce a ton of carbon and then attract that payment? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosalind. And Catherine?
Thank you very much, Rosalind, because I really believe that's an important point, what you raised, the opportunity cost and the right price for all that, which is really difficult indeed, no? Because maybe we will never be able really to compensate really the full cost of converting the forest to mining, or we tried actually. So I think we should try, and definitely it's something we can do, and we can try, I mean, from different perspectives, we can try to increase, for example, the demand also, the demand for high integrity, or to product that has been produced without deforestation. We have to increase this demand and the visibility, and also the price for high quality products, so, and high quality carbon credit or other biodiversity credit. So I think it's really a common objective together to do that. I will maybe, and the point you raised on capacity building for new coming, especially for carbon market, for example, there are a lot of capacity building still needed, and so also for local community to manage this fund that they are going to receive. I would just maybe share one example of France. In France, we have been involved in a different initiative. For example, the Central Africa Forest Initiative. I don't know if you know it, but it's an initiative with different donors, and I think it was quite good because we managed to first to coordinate donors. So all the donors are sitting on the table and they are, speaking with each other, and I think that's helpful for the country too. We have managed also to raise the visibility, but also the money that has been flowing to this country, which is quite important. Right now, last week we launched the call of BLM for the Congo Basin Pledge. So we reached like $2.5 billion for the country. So that was a big success. Actually, we managed to do that with Gabon on this. And I think also what's quite interesting with the CAFI, but also I will come after with country packages, is that we started to have like partnerships. So basically, there are two sides. No, there is a side from the donors where we say we will try to find this finance, we will try to leverage the private sectors, we will really try together to do that with you, but we would also like to see a partnership so that there is a kind of an agreement between us that we try that and you try maybe other stuff like policy or regulations, and that's maybe how we do it. In France, we launched like 4 country partnerships actually with DRC, Congo, PNG, and the one with Gabon, and there was also one in Ghana. We are not part of it, but there was one very important, and we see that it's important that it needs to be fit for purpose. So we will try that to follow a plan that is led by the government. So it's like an investment plan, no? And we really believe that's the key point. So there is a plan for the country. We have to fit this plan basically, and to try to have a common agreement, but follow what you lead on that. So I think on that they are very interesting, and we hope there will be other country packages. I think it's something increasing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the panel. We are 1 minute away from the time, but not as a... Yes, Maria.
Yeah, I think to me, I take 2 messages which are very important. First, there is no sequence between capacity building and implementation. Capacity building has to evolve. It has to evolve at the pace of the movement of the country towards their challenge. And the second take-home I have is, at the very end, is about a much more complex setting than forest alone. And the finance should be as diverse as possible. And I like it very much what Rosalind said. Okay, we have to sort of guarantee livelihoods while we are starting to transition, but at the very end, what we need is to diversify, to provide alternative livelihoods. And I think this is, for me, a fundamental message. I mean, the countries are not only thinking on short-term finance for the transition, but they are thinking on actually moving forward and diversifying the economy for the livelihoods to retain and to control the drivers of deforestation. And I think the word driver is too simplistic for me. I think it's much more complex than drivers.
Couldn't have said it better, and definitely not red faces, red layers. And this idea of trying to maintain the progression, trying to maintain the recognition of the different circumstances, in addition to what Maria mentioned. Thank you so much for your contribution.